The blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is about so much more than oil, and we're going to cover that and an interview with human rights activist Gissou Nia. All that on the Foreign Report today. Let's do it. Welcome back to the Foreign Report. I'm Seena and Travis. This is your weekly foreign policy show that gives you all the gory details of geopolitics with hopefully some laughs along the way. In the digital studio is Travis, Columbia Journalism School, Irvine.
Pew, 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 pew. All raccoon gear today, sir. That's right. I'm pumping myself up.
There you go. T-Seps in the studio. I'm your FP Zaddy. Wow, what a show we have for you today. We just recorded an interview with Gissou Nia. She's a human rights activist and lawyer. And boy, another great example of when I should not have a Celsius before the show. I was very emotional, and I think we got through it, though. This is a very good interview. What did you think, Travis? Did you have a good time?
She's a fantastic interview. It's one of those interviews where I don't talk because one time, and I know you don't read the comments, but someone at some point in one of our interview episodes said, "What's up with the guy who just sits there and nods the whole time?" It's like, when we're talking to smart guests, I know the proper journalist move is to shut up. So that's what I do. She's fantastic, though. She gave us, for me at least, a lot of hope. I know you got verklempt. You got skin in this game, bro. You got skin in this game. And
I do.
I don't know. I admire anyone who does the human rights work because, as she touched on, it so often gets pushed to the back burner anytime we're thinking about foreign conflicts or policy or anything like that. So I appreciate her work.
I know, Travis, you are a very humble man. You are also a very smart political mind. So I also want to empower you. You should just jump in there. I mean, you've got things to say. You've got thoughts, but I get it. There's a lot that was going on. So, I mean, we can keep it moving.
If I still had my beard, I'd be dropping beard jokes every 5 minutes on these guests. But that's what I
see
said.
A hint
this show
of it coming back.
Oh, yes. This will take a little bit. Maybe by the time the war's over, the war that's not a war.
If you wait until the war is over, buddy, you're going to be the next supreme leader.
Yes, I will be the Ayatollah, as someone said in the comments. Come on, folks. These jokes write themselves.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the Strait. We've got this great interview, so most of the show will be that interview, but a lot of people are talking about the Strait of Hormuz. And then this week, again, we're recording on Tuesday, April 14th. There is a blockade that is happening of the Strait. But what is being blocked? It's not just oil, right? We've talked about Karg Island, and which is where Iran has a bunch of like oil infrastructure there, but that's deeper in the Persian Gulf. But it gets processed. But what else is getting kind of routed from the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz? Or what I learned, it's Hormuz, not Hormuz. And I've been pronouncing it incorrectly. But you know what? What are we going to do? I'm from Pittsburgh. I can't get all the Iranian words right, all the Persian words. I can't do it.
Yeah, you're a yinzer at the end of the day. You were raised a yinzer. You're always going to be a yinzer.
Salam alaikum. How yin's done? Go to that kebab store.
You know, I used to pronounce it Hormel chili. And it turns out it's horrible chili. Thanks so much. I finally got him. Folks. Get him back in frame. In frame.
Adam was like painstakingly getting me in frame on this camera. Anyways, I think I'm okay now. Here's a mess. All right. But we've talked about the oil last week, right? 130 ships of all varying kinds go through the strait. And then there's roughly 20 to 25% of the world's oil passes through the strait every day. And what else, though, goes through there? Travis, liquefied natural gas, fertilizer, some stuff that's critical for semiconductors, and something we all hate is a big thing that's involved in the strait as well. So let's talk about each of these real quick.
Real quick, baby. And also, how does the blockade? Wasn't Trump trying to make sure the strait was open, and now he just flipped his like, how about we block it? I don't understand the strategy, so please explain to me.
Exactly. So I think he's, he's seeing that the air raids are not working and that the economic war is really where he thinks he could apply some pressure. And frankly, if you can actually bankrupt the regime, because sanctions weren't working, sanctions were just allowing the regime to use, shadow fleets and other ways to evade sanctions. But if you literally stop the very thing that makes them money, then you can put the regime in a chokehold. Now, how does that impact the Iranian people is another thing that is to be determined. But I think the Iranian people that are desperate to get rid of this regime, but we'll see what ends up happening. I mean, and the other thing is like, and we'll talk about this maybe in another show or another video or whatever, but there's like these islands in the little elbow of the strait that are
Mm,
where the Iranian military and the IRGC are kind of stationing, where they deploy the mines, where they deploy the drones, where they do all these things. So if there is like an invasion by the United States or Israel or whatever, they could try to take those islands. And so that's a big thing to consider.
wow.
Um, but what else goes through the strait? Liquefied natural gas. Travis, 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas goes through the strait.
That's crazy. In addition to 20% of the world's oil.
Yes. And most of that is from Qatar, and it goes to Europe and Asia. Again, we don't use a bunch of stuff that comes from the strait, but we are impacted from it because, as we've talked about, it's a global economy. We're all wrapped up. Thank you, capitalism. So
Right.
great.
Yes. Good thing the Trump administration is also killing all the solar panels and wind power that we were supposed to have. But I digress. That's a whole nother show for me to do.
But I think, yeah, we should do it because I think that's where everything's gonna start going because it's clear, like, you can't just this is crazy. There's gonna be
Right.
these wars. You're not gonna have a war over the sun. I mean, here I say that, and look, we'll probably have that
Yeah.
be like
Wait
Russia
till
trying to
next week.
block the sun.
We're invading the sun and we're taking it's a lot of oil there, apparently.
And then there's the fertilizer. I think some people have talked about it. I don't think we've really talked about it on the show, but like a third of the world's traded fertilizer passes through the strait. And
Hmm.
India, Brazil, and China really depend on that. Okay. So
Ah,
that's another huge thing.
the BRICS countries.
And then there's this element that is critical for semiconductor production, all those AI chips, and that's helium. Now, I wish I would have gone to the store before. I wanted to get a helium balloon and do a funny helium bit, but we had this interview. I was busy. I was also on page 7 today, so things were happening today.
Yes, a little busy.
Third of the world's helium goes through the strait. So that's also from Qatar. Japan, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan are places that use that helium because they have a lot of advanced chip fabrication facilities. So they use helium to cool and stabilize the environment for the different stages of the chip manufacturing process, which is like crazy to me. And one of the ways you create helium is it's waste from liquefied natural gas production. So
Hmm.
can you see the cascading shitstorm that is arriving? If you have to stop basically pumping liquefied natural gas because it's not getting out, then you stop the helium. And apparently helium is like it's a mess. Like, here, let me share my screen on this one
Yeah, please, because
thing.
that's interesting. It's nice to know the world's helium isn't just going to a bunch of clowns with balloons. This actually has a useful purpose.
So this is an article from Scientific American. We'll put it in the show notes. And this is from like a month ago. And so they were like, this is going to be real bad. Even if it stops like in March, it's still going to be bad because there's like a lingering effect. And this is from Scientific America talking about how important helium is. Yet the crisis arrives at a time when the helium market has been awash in surplus, which mitigates the war's immediate effect. Quote, there is going to be a shortage, says Phil Kornbluth, founder of Kornbluth Helium Consulting, which is probably the most boring consultancy
Right.
ever created until last month.
Sure, yes. I assume everyone at the company talks in high pitched voices. Like that's how they do all their company calls. Hopefully.
But the big question, he says, is its duration. This is again from Phil. There are 3 helium plants in Qatar, and 2 of them produce helium from the waste gas from LNG, liquefied natural gas plants. The LNG gets loaded onto tankers whose only path to the ocean is through the Strait of Hormuz. When the Strait of
Whoa.
Hormuz is closed, once the LNG storage tanks get filled, they have to shut down. He says
Wow.
military attacks against Qatar's facilities have also contributed to the closure of the plants. So this is one of those things where we don't see the problem now, but even if the war stops, we're going to see the problem in the future. And
Wow.
it's, yeah, I always love a grenade, an economic grenade that is just getting tossed in here.
Right.
So that's another thing to really think about. And then the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to the Strait is you don't necessarily need mines, you don't necessarily need drones, you need the threat of violence on these ships, because the fourth thing is insurance. What insurance company is going to insure hundreds of millions of dollars in oil that are going through a strait that could blow up or that could get sunk?
Right. Right. It's like getting house insurance in Florida or hurricane insurance. It's just like, why would I?
Yeah,
Why is I, as an insurance company, give you anything when I know?
exactly. Why are we doing that? We're
Yeah.
not giving you flood insurance, bro. Sorry. Your
Right.
beachfront property is not going to get it. So this
Right.
this is what is very crazy about and even the US, if they say like we'll back the insurance, no, it doesn't. Sorry, it's not going to work. So just the threat of violence or the threat of this is too much risk for a lot of these insurance companies, and that inherently stops a lot of commercial traffic. And so the land options that people are way, 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 way less, like orders of magnitude less, have less capacity. So again, we've talked about this on the show, and there's also this idea that like this is like the China question of it all. China, we're doing this because Trump is doing some sort of 4D chess to play against China. And my thing is like China apparently has been stockpiling oil because they knew something was probably going to happen eventually in the Middle East, in West Asia, and they now are, they have a little bit of a runway, but in a couple months, they could run out of oil. And it's not like China's going to be like, okay, we're out of oil. I guess our country's just going to collapse. No, they'll find it somewhere. Or, you know what else they could do, Travis? They could send their ships to escort Iranian oil from the Persian Gulf, from the Strait to China. And what are we going to do? What are we going to attack a Chinese
Yeah. Right.
destroyer?
You want to go ahead and start World War III? Just go ahead and.
Exactly.
Woo!
And even if you don't believe me that China's Navy is better than our Navy, okay? If you don't believe that China has a better thing, don't listen to me. Listen to a man who has a worse beard than Travis.
Whoa, I didn't even know that was possible.
Real power of the Chinese military is the ability to manufacture. They have dozens to hundreds of times more military shipbuilding capacity than we do. And as someone who's made things in China, I know how cheap things can be done over there, not because the labor's cheap, but because the people are good, the regulations are good, the supply chain and logistics and materials are very favorable. So when I talk about China kicking our ass in a mass on mass conflict, I'm talking about what happens when you have the things that they're good at making versus the things that we're good at making in an actual war, not a prestige war or a marketing war. And unfortunately, right now, they are very much on the right side of the equation. They're building weapons that are sometimes better than ours for a tenth of the price and 100 times the scale. Anti-ship missiles are a huge concern, particularly ones that get into the high supersonic or low hypersonic regime where it's very hard to defend against them. And even if you can defend against one, can you defend against 10? Can you defend against 100? And when an aircraft carrier is so many billions of dollars, you can justify throwing a lot of missiles at it and it still makes a lot of sense from China's perspective. The scenario I'm talking about, I don't think China's going to go for a Pearl Harbor. I don't think that they're going to aggressively seek out the United States Navy wherever they are on the planet and try to wipe it out. That's not in their strategic interests, not today, probably not in the near future. But what they probably could do right now is deny the US Navy the ability to operate in pretty much any area that they make a priority. If you make enough hypersonic anti-ship missiles,
Yep.
you're not going to have ships existing in range of those missiles. And if the United States knows that, what actually happens is not the destruction of the US Navy, but the neutering of the US Navy.
Wow, how dare
And that
you?
was Palmer Luckey from
I'm aware
Andrew.
Palmer Luckey.
Yeah.
I am way too aware of this man's existence.
Yeah.
Another Peter Thiel lackey who got
Yep.
lucky, literally, and he is now a multi-million-dollar. This guy was a gamer LARPer who has now become
Well,
rich off of.
he made Oculus. He made the
I
VR
don't care.
headset
He's
that got
such a
bought by.
nerd, and I can't believe this
He's
man has an ounce of power within our military. They're building for his company. They're building a plant just 20 miles
yes.
south of Columbus, Ohio. And it's like a big jobs thing. And it's like, what are they building? Oh, unmanned drones
Yep.
to attack, to prepare for the eventual inevitable war with China. Can't wait. Thanks, Palmer Luckey. And his beard is, you are correct, worse than mine.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that is the worry there. And there's, because I see a lot of people online talk about how, again, 4D chess, and this is like, we're going to mess with China because of all this. They can make the decision that they're not being messed with anymore. And I think there's like some sort of like, we view China in a vacuum as we do a thing and then they don't do a thing. Like,
Right.
they could react, and they have a much longer time horizon. Trump's got the midterms coming up, and he's going to get smoked. So, like, this is, and you know who's going to really lose in all of this? JD Vance. And so let's take a break, and you're going to hear the interview from Gissou. But after that, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite vice president, JD Vance. Welcome back to the Foreign Report. I'm Seena and Travis Irvine in the virtual studio. With us is a very special guest. Gissou Nia is an Iranian-American human rights lawyer and the founder-director of the Atlantic Council Strategic Litigation Project, which advises on the inclusion of legal tools as part of global policy, focusing specifically on prevention and accountability efforts for atrocity crimes and human rights violations. Good thing we don't have any of those today, so she's got nothing to work on. She's also, honestly, someone I have recommended people follow on social and her work for years now. I was so pleasantly surprised that she agreed to do the interview. So, Gissou, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome to the Foreign Report.
Thank you for having me on.
Let's get to some real questions here that I think would help our audience out. When we talk about the Islamic regime's human rights record today, can you kind of go over some of the more systemic abuses they've done, and you know what should we be looking at? What are people not seeing from the human rights abuses from the Islamic Republic?
I mean, the Islamic Republic has engaged in human rights violations for 47 years. So this is nothing new. There has been a lot of global attention in recent years because of successive nationwide protests against the regime. But these are issues that have plagued the Islamic Republic since its very inception. And that's because the Islamic Republic's Islamic Penal Code very clearly criminalizes activity like same-sex relations. It has morality crimes. For example, a woman can be stoned to death for adultery. These are all things that are written in the laws. So, it's interesting when I hear people, I think South Africa's deputy foreign minister had said something like she wasn't sure if Iran was a dictatorship. She said this maybe 9 months ago or something like that, before the most recent protest. But I was like, ma'am, I'm not sure what more information you need, but like, look at the laws, right? And of course, there are antiquated laws on the books in many different countries around the world that are never enforced. And it's a problem that they're on the books, but it's also kind of a joke of like, they're never enforced. Like, it's not even something that would, come into any sort of implementation. That's not the case with the Islamic Republic. These laws are enforced. The Islamic Republic has the highest rate per capita of executions anywhere in the world. And they've been that grim record holder for years, on and off, but for almost 2 decades, since we've been really counting this information. They're one of the leaders almost always. They jail journalists for freedom of expression. They jail people who use social media, who say things that they don't approve of. Essentially, they have very broad and vague laws that criminalize any form of dissent. And that's just going to be supercharged now because there is actually a real existential threat to their existence. Before, a lot of times it was, actions against perceived enemies, claims of espionage that were just nonsense, Now it's a bit different. There are plenty of dissidents. There are people who actually want to overthrow this regime, and that behavior is criminalized in the Islamic Republic. The problem is that even peaceful dissent is criminalized. So we're not talking, violent actions against the government. We just, if you are peacefully protesting this government, that in and of itself is a crime. And the Islamic Republic always has some canned responses about why they're not violating these laws, or why they're not violating international law. But the very truth of it is just their very criminal code violates international law. So it's kind of a non-starter of a discussion, because without completely dismantling this framework, I really don't understand how there could be a change in the human rights situation. And that's why the conversations around reform never really make sense. And I think that's why so many longtime reformists, even people like Shirin Ebadi, or, people who once thought they could work within these institutions, they eventually realized there's just no way to do that.
Thank you for that, because my next question was going to be the big response and the big comment we get on a lot of our videos is, but the United States does all of these terrible things. And I think I just want to literally play your answer every time someone says that to us, because I get blue in the face when I try to say, I get it. It's really bad here sometimes, and ICE is bad, and we see terrible things, but it's so many orders of magnitude. And I love what you said there. The very penal code itself is a violation of international law. Let's talk about the international law. What is the international accountability process for this? Because, as we've seen over the last couple of years, it doesn't seem like there's any teeth in the international courts that can actually stop anything, or if they are, they're very old teeth that are dentures that take a long time to settle into anything.
Yeah, before I get to that, one quick note on the US, because of course this is a question that comes up. First of all, we don't do whataboutism. Just because, things are bad in one country absolutely has no bearing on whether they're bad in another country. So I think comparisons are often not useful in that regard, to do kind of like the oppression Olympics. Let's see who has it worse, right? But when I hear things like, what the US is doing to its citizens is the same as what's happening in Iran, it's just patently untrue and laughable. Now, we should always prevent countries from going in a direction where they are a dictatorship, where they're eroding everybody's rights, of course. But, you can't take that seriously when somebody makes that comparison at this point in time. I think Iran is of magnitudes in a human rights crisis that completely smokes, what we're dealing with in the US at this present time. Of course, that could change, but that's what we're dealing with right now. In terms of international law, real quickly, international law is only enforceable through states. So, because, the way that obviously a domestic criminal law process works is that the state is going to make that decision for everybody within its borders. The problem that you have with international law is we don't have any international global order that's going to make different countries enforce things. You can be part of multilateral institutions like the United Nations. You can have an idea that everybody will want to partake in the system and participate in it because they will benefit from the reciprocity of being in that. Like, a really good example is why typically we don't kill heads of state. So,
Typically,
I think neither Venezuelans nor Iranians are mad right now about what's happened over the past few months. And so, but there's so little, when people have asked about the legality of all this, there's actually such little jurisprudence or guidance on how to really dissect this issue, because it's typically not done. And the reason why countries don't go after other countries' heads of state generally is because then it could happen to their own, right? So it's that sense of reciprocity that actually prevents countries from taking certain actions. And that's what builds norms, right? I think we have to really investigate where we are right now and kind of reconfigure where we are right now, because the international legal system hasn't managed to deliver for huge populations of people. So one reason Venezuelans were absolutely cheering when Maduro was captured by US forces and taken to a criminal courtroom in Manhattan is because he has evaded responsibility for crimes against humanity for decades. There's no way to bring this guy before a court of law right now. There was no way. It was impossible to bring him. The International Criminal Court hadn't, issued an arrest warrant. There would be no way to bring him to The Hague anyway. Politics can change and eventually that can happen. But for now, that wasn't happening. Same thing with Ali Khamenei. That guy didn't leave Iran since he had taken up his tenure as supreme leader in 1989. How would he ever end up in a courtroom? He might be tried in absentia, meaning he wouldn't physically need to be in a courtroom, but there was really no prospect for him being brought into court. And so, that's the tough question here. It's like these populations have not been served by the international legal order in pretty significant ways. And so nobody can begrudge them if they're cheering on
Sure.
when heads of state are captured or killed. It's perfectly understandable.
One of the things I wanted to ask you as a person that's been watching this forever, and I remember I was in law school in 2009 when the Green Movement happened, and a friend looked over to me because it was like the Arab Spring stuff was, hey, he's like, do you think this is gonna be it? And like a good jaded Iranian son, I was like, no, they'll be out in the streets for a little bit, then they'll start killing the protesters, and then everyone will go home. And sorry, I'm getting a little messed up over here. And that's what happened. And it keeps happening.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask you, like, what pattern do you see in all of these protests and uprisings, like the pattern of the uprising itself and the changes in how the regime has responded?
Yeah. One thing to say is that I am very hopeful about where this all goes. And that makes a lot of people maybe in Washington, D.C. view me as naive or idealistic or whatnot, but I don't study foreign policy to be a policy analyst. I work on human rights issues, represent people who've been subjected to human rights violations, and study people power. And that's a really different exercise than people who are looking at money flows or kind of just dealing in the conventional wisdom of how they think things happen, and who are more often in the business of injecting realism into something than to really look at the desire and will of a people. And the one thing that I've seen in every country that underwent a transition is that the people never gave up and that everything seemed impossible until it was possible. Bashar al-Assad was ousted from Syria.
Yeah.
Now, that's not, I'm not saying they're a massive success story right now, but he was ousted. And up until right before his ouster, there were people, foreign policy analysts saying that would never happen. There were countries getting donor fatigue to, human rights work that Syrian civil society organizations were doing, saying that nothing would ever change in Syria. So it was sort of, they were questioning the sensibility of funding these initiatives that we're working on, drafting constitutions, doing accountability work, very much the kind of thing that I work on. And all of that changed in a matter of a few days. Now, of course, that was, after a very bloody war, civil conflict, internationalized conflict, different countries coming together, Turkey having a role in that and like deciding that they would let that happen. But the point is that a lot of analysts were claiming it would never happen. So I don't put a whole lot of stock into people that are more part of the foreign policy establishment, I guess. And like, they're not necessarily in touch with people. So a lot of people who comment on Iran don't speak to any Iranians.
Yeah.
Like, really, if you look at who is commenting, they might comment on what the, US government's military capacity is. They might comment on, flows of money. All of that is also important, of course, but they don't actually speak to Iranians. They can't speak the language. Most of them are not Iranian, so, and even some Iran analysts don't actually have contacts like that in Iran, right? One thing I feel really blessed about is that because of Instagram, which is one of the most popular social media, tools in Iran, I was always in touch with a lot of Iranians who just follow me on Instagram. My second biggest following on Instagram are people in Iran. And you can see they're in Iran because like their stories are in Iran and all that. Now, of course, the internet has been shut off. We're in is it the 46th day of an internet shutdown? I have to double check, but it's the longest running shutdown that a government ever has done to the citizens of its country. The previous record holder was Sudan in 2019 for 37 days. So it's really abhorrent. But, now
Iran, number one internet shutdown. Very good. It's the best in so many things.
Oh my God. Yeah. They're really killing it, unfortunately.
They
Oh
are.
my God, that's a horrible way of putting it. But like they have really just shut off communication to all these people for And before that, the internet was shut down too. But there's a lot of people on Instagram who are sharing what their friends and family are saying, the people that they can connect to through Starlink, through phone calls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a lot of people that are opining on the situation, that they don't have the benefit of really like hearing that.
I want to talk about sanctions for a minute here, because I was, I don't want to say I was a big sanctions guy, but I was like, it's not war. Isn't this good? And it seemed like for Obama, the sanctions worked to bring them to the table to make a deal, which every Iranian in America was like very upset about this deal, but it was like this weird gamble and everything like that. But it seems like sanctions have not worked at all in changing behavior in Iran. And then now the sanctions are slightly lifted. Can you tell us a little bit about the use of sanctions vis-a-vis Iran and how they could work? And if you see them as a beneficial thing?
Yeah, so this is a long-running debate, and I should know I'm not a sanctions expert. So the area of sanctions that I worked on for a long time are targeted sanctions, which are asset freezes, travel bans on specific individuals that are committing human rights violations, or for whom I wanted to potentially try to not only freeze their assets, but seize their assets and repurpose it for good for the human rights community or for the Iranian people. But the conversation about broad-based economic sanctions is interesting now, because the whole point of broad-based economic sanctions is to try to avoid kinetic options. It's, as you said, it's to try to avoid war. It's to try to induce behavior change into governmental actors to either bring them to the negotiating table or whatnot. I guess it just depends what you want sanctions for. So in theory, sanctions are supposed to induce behavior change to then get to the negotiating table. I think what the demand of many Iranians is we don't want the regime.
Yeah.
So there's no desire for a negotiating table. So what I hope, sanctions will do, and I saw that the Treasury Department just issued a communication today. I had already heard this from people there, but the U.S. Treasury Department said it's moving aggressively on what they said economic fury, obviously a play on Operation Epic Fury, the name of the military operation. And they want to make sure that financial institutions are not going to be evading sanctions. This is what I'll tell you. There are sanctions on Iran. They've been in place for a long time now, especially there was like some sanctions relief during the JCPOA, Obama's time, and then Trump pulled out. And then, during Biden's time, all these sanctions were still in place. They're not properly enforced.
Yeah.
So, for example, the United Arab Emirates only just arrested money changers in its country because the Islamic Republic was sending missiles to Dubai. I'm sure everybody saw that on social media and heard about it. But they never bothered to crack down on those money changers before. The UAE, these money changers are people that are essentially helping the IRGC evade sanctions. These are linked to, basically like washing money and using Dubai and the UAE really as a port for that to send money to IRGC linked entities. Why didn't the UAE arrest these people?
Yeah.
Ago, right? Why? They're canceling the residency permits of all these Iranians as well. Unfortunately, that's going to affect people who are not part of the IRGC, but it's also going to affect a lot of people who are linked to the IRGC, right? Why didn't they take these measures before? Obviously, if China is buying Iran's oil, even at a discount rate, the sanctions can never fully work. That means that the Islamic Republic is still getting money. What we need to do now is absolutely put the Islamic Republic in a chokehold money-wise. People are saying, okay, even with this military campaign, they're still not defeated, whatever. You know how they will be defeated? By not having money. There's zero chance in my mind that lower level IRGC people are going to be like, this sounds great if they're not getting paid. They're not that ideological. There's always comments about these guys are so ideological, they'll never leave. I'm like, they're pretty corrupt. They handle a lot of business interests. I think they'll follow the money. And if there is no money, I don't think they're going to be incentivized to stay on. They'll go to the highest bidder.
And that's what we've been seeing, and Kareem Sarjapour has talked about this. When the revolution happened in '79, it was 80% true believers and 20% charlatans, and now it's vice versa. It's 20% true believers and 80% charlatans. Maybe they killed 15% of the 20% now over the last couple of months. I don't know. But it does seem like these sanctions were kind of a joke. But to your point, if What I'm hearing, though, is if we're going to choke the money, everyone has to be involved. Like the whole world has to agree, which is kind of brings me to maybe like the other question I have is like the third way of like how to defeat the Islamic Republic. And it's the whole world has to agree that this is bad, right? Because doing deals with them is not working. Bombing them is clearly not working. But the world still wants to do business with them, and they don't really care about all the other stuff.
Yeah, and it's a really tricky question because there's been some decisions that have been made along the way that make that kind of global support difficult, right? So, um, I'm not a politician, so
Thank God.
Politics is a dirty game, and sometimes you have to ally with people who you share some interests with, but where you might both backstab each other, and and you have to make alliances with unsavory characters. It is what it is, and that's
Yeah.
why I'm not a politician, frankly. I just prefer my tree hugging hippie human rights lawyer.
I mean, we're in a podcast studio. Clearly, we've made our allegiances known.
But there's a real world out there, and I'm very aware of it, and I try to like work in some of those institutions too, because I can't just like live in my bubble and think that's how the world is. But with politics, the son of the deposed Shah, Reza Pahlavi, obviously has made a decision to double down on the relationship with Israel. I think part of it
Which is going to work out great for him, by the way. I think that is top 10 best decisions he's made.
I think so obviously I'm not speaking as somebody who would be like analyzing human rights violations or anything like that. Just purely looking at the politics, I think the calculation, not that I'm inside his head, but the calculation was, look, they have the intelligence, they have the Mossad penetration. Let's face it, that's how this information is getting leaked. And they, can work with the U.S. military might to dislodge this regime, right? Like that was the plan. The tricky side of that, among many other issues, but the tricky side of that is like if it doesn't work out, then a lot of the globe thinks like you've aligned the cause of the Iranian opposition to the politics of Israel, and the politics of Israel isn't the most popular globally, to put it mildly, right? We live a little bit in a bubble in the US, and it just is what it is, So then you kind of get into the trouble spot of how do you build a global movement that's really supporting Iranian freedom? And I think just a casual review of comments on social media tells you all you need to know about how people are viewing, and these are not bots, how they're viewing the Iranian opposition movement. Like during Women Like Freedom, I mean, during Women Like Freedom, it was like these amazing Iranian women who are like fighting tyranny. And now it's like, you guys are part of like an imperialist machine or something. It's so depressing and so untrue and so sad. But that's kind of what's happening. And then you see that there's a lot of, I'm sure some of this is like state-sponsored and government-driven paid narratives, but you see like thirst traps of Islamic Republic of Iran officials, like women like fawning over these guys, like this claim that every Islamic Republic of Iran official is like a PhD philosopher and how amazing they are. These guys are stone cold killers. These guys are disgusting people, like disgusting people. And you have this whole like fan base for them. And the thing is, that's not all bots, like there are real people doing that, and they're believing their own lies. But that's a difficult thing for a global narrative, obviously. So I think the thing that's on our side is that a lot of these countries are now really upset with the Islamic Republic and its belligerent behavior. So, the US and Israel launched these strikes, and then the Islamic Republic responded by attacking like all its neighbors in the Gulf. Like, I mean, it just made no sense. And that's why the UAE did what it did. So at least that's in the favor of Iranian protesters, in the sense that, a lot of countries are disenchanted with the actions of the Islamic Republic and will be prepared to take a more hardline stance on them. But we really need to do the work to have the Islamic Republic be viewed as illegitimate. They're an illegitimate state, and no matter where people fall on the political spectrum or their ideology or like what they think of these military strikes, that doesn't take away the fact that the Islamic Republic is illegitimate and the people do not want that regime. There's a minority of people that want them. That's it. There's widespread disenchantment, and that cannot be repeated enough.
So let's dig into that a little bit more. Again, things we see online, my very kind diaspora people will be like, if you're not Javid Shah, Baba, then what? What do you want? Do you want the Islamic Republic forever? And it's like, what is the response? What is the way forward? The thing in my head, I'm like, well, is South Africa the model? Like how we killed apartheid or how we got rid of apartheid? What model can we look towards as guidance in trying to defeat the Islamic Republic? What path forward do we have?
I mean, the model of South Africa was a issue really championed by the global South, and it was a moral cause. You know, at the end of the day, it was really viewed widely and globally as a moral cause. The cause of freedom in Iran is no less a moral and just cause. And you know, I'll tell you that during Women Life Freedom, that was the first time that I ever saw a shift in the attitudes from countries that are typically, you know, anti-imperialist or typically not aligned with the politics of the US, really supporting Iranians, Iranian people, Iranian women. I think the brutality of the Islamic Republic was pretty much laid bare, and countries in Latin America and Africa and Asia who had never supported votes that were unfavorable to the Islamic Republic, they had never supported those votes at the UN, for example, and all of a sudden they were supporting it. You know, so there was a real shift. I all of a sudden was getting invited. I had never been really on mainstream media. Nobody ever wanted to talk to anybody that spoke about human rights. They only wanted to talk with people who were supporting the nuclear deal or working on the nuclear deal, or alternatively talking about Israel's security or the US's security. They're not interested in like Iran human rights, right? But all of a sudden, the issues that I work on became mainstream, and there were big media outlets asking me on, and also more left-leaning outlets that typically would have, you know, want to reduce the situation to the US versus Iran, you know, or where's Israel in this? And it's like, what about the Iranian people? Like, this is not where our focus is. There's a whole conversation by Iranians, for Iranians, about Iran, coming out of Iran, that just, quite frankly, was never in the media narrative. And I think Women Life Freedom was the first time I really saw that happening. It gave me a lot of hope that minds could be changed about what people are really dealing with in the country, and that this dictatorship would finally be obvious to people outside of Iran's borders. You know, it's become a more complicated picture now, but I think that freedom movement lives on, and it's all our duty to make sure that, you know, we push back on this propaganda and the narrative that somehow the Iranian freedom movement is co-opted or whatever. This is long-standing. This is for decades. People have been working in a grassroots manner. People have been coming out in successive nationwide protests against the regime for more than a decade. Nobody should reduce what's happening in Iran and the freedom movement to something that belongs to global superpowers. It doesn't. It belongs to Iranians.
Why does human rights so often? I'm getting full. I had a Celsius before. I feel like my heart rate spiked, and that's getting so emotional today. Why does human rights take a back seat to these nukes? And I feel like I even know little Seena here in Los Angeles knew that Khamenei was not a big nuke guy. He was just using it as a deterrent. How is it that this constantly was front and center and not? Because I feel like the human rights question is such a better story, frankly, just to be glib about it. It's a better narrative to go at. It unifies everybody. Why does it take a back seat to the nukes and the security stuff?
Yeah, human rights is often perceived as a soft issue, especially in foreign policy circles. So for decades, I worked at small NGOs or at international courts. So very much like a nonprofit environment. I'm still at a nonprofit, but it's a think tank in DC. So I brought our little group of human rights lawyers to this very typical DC think tank. And the reason was because I wanted to be in the rooms that I was never invited into, right? Like, nobody's inviting the small human rights NGO to brief the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. Like, they're just not going to do that. You don't have that access. But when you're at a big think tank, you do. And it was amazing to me how little of the conversation is ever in any way concerning human rights. It's always about security, terrorism, economic issues, right? Trade, never human rights. It's always seen as something soft and fluffy. And I will say that I think it's actually core to foreign policy, to negotiations, especially with dictatorships. And frankly, if we had a free Iran that was human rights abiding, most of these other issues would have fallen away. We wouldn't be worrying about what would a nuclear program be looking like. There wouldn't be concerns about regional terrorism. Like, nothing of that would be in play if there was a free Iran that was democratic. So I think there were so many missteps that were made, and some of the advice that was given around the time of the Green Movement and also in later years and lead up to the JCPOA really kicked the can down the road in terms of the problem. Like, the regime in Iran will go. That for me is a certainty at some point, because the people overwhelmingly do not want it. So it will be a matter of time, and at some point it will go. And countries have essentially just tread water, been in a holding pattern, just delayed the inevitable because they didn't feel like dealing with it. Whereas if they had just like dealt with this head on and really marginalized this regime in all the ways that were needed, then a lot of lives would have been saved and the Iranian people would already be living in that better future.
Can you give some people or our audience, Travis and I, some advice on what we can do as just people, as opposed to, all we do is scream into these microphones and I try to get on a whiteboard and I show people what's happening over there. And I think people appreciate it. But like, what else can people do? What can our audience do? Are there little things that we could try to work on?
Yeah, I have 3 concrete things. I'll try to keep it quick, that everybody can do. One is that there is an intense propaganda effort online right now to deny that there was a massacre in Iran in January. We know for certain that there were at least more than 7,000 people killed, and there's an additional 10,000 under review by a group called Harana, which is a human rights group working on Iran and which has documented protest violence for more than a decade. They're a very reputable organization and have a robust methodology. That means that there's at least double-digit thousands of people that were killed in 2 days. If you average that out, that's comparable to the rate of kills during the Rwandan genocide in the late 90s, which invited a lot of international reflection on how that happened and basically prompted countries to decide to take a stronger response in the future so that innocent people wouldn't be killed. But that was one of the worst episodes of global violence ever. And this is on par with that in terms of the rate of kills. And of course, these were not people that were killed with bombs, where you can kill a lot of people at once at scale. These were people that were killed individually with machine guns and machetes. And the fact that we now have a strong contingent of people online claiming that none of this happened, that Mossad is behind these killings, all of this is patently untrue. We know there are thousands of mourning families. We know that these are real people because they are holding funerals for them. They have life stories. We have seen this. And we have seen videos of pro-Islamic Republic militias or Islamic Republic security forces gunning these people down. This is not the act of some sort of outside actor. So it's unbelievable how much pushback I see online about this and people claiming, like, what are you guys talking about, making fun, dismissing, being
Yeah.
sarcastic. Any person out there can always look for the facts, cite the numbers from Harana, cite any credible reporting and say that's just simply not true. And we need to see more comments like that because that's really a narrative that's overtaking the internet and it's just astounding. Other things that can happen are, we see that President Trump has wildly oscillating opinions on what should happen in Iran. I don't really know how much of it is rhetoric versus reality. It's really hard to track. But we shouldn't forget in this that there are Iranian people that want to see the regime gone. And so any actions that can be supported that stop the financial flow to the regime is certainly the path forward. And that's something that anybody can support, even if they don't support military strikes. Because I know a lot of non-Iranians in particular are very uncomfortable with the idea of their tax dollars in the US being used to do this. Okay, so support cutting off the financials to the Islamic Republic. Support, understand that no matter what is happening, and if you agree or disagree with that portion of it, understand that the people still want to overthrow their government and support them in that. The other thing is just to follow, I think, accounts of people who are providing credible information and amplifying what they're saying and taking the actions when they ask you to take those actions. If they ask you to sign that petition, sign that petition. If they ask you to write a letter to your congressperson, write that letter. But don't get lost in the propaganda of the Islamic Republic. I think way too many well-meaning people who might be anti-war or who, are not really fans of President Trump's policy on other issues are immediately taking a stance that is not in support of the Iranian people because of those other viewpoints that they hold. And so I want people to think more critically about it and understand that many things can be true at the same time, and listen to Iranian voices who have always been consistent, credible, and are telling you, facts about the situation. Listen to them and try to support them in that.
That's wonderful. That's what we've tried to do on the show as well, because I think people every week see me go through a whole conflicting emotions. Travis has to keep up how much I hate these Lego videos, but yet they are entertaining and they're awful, and I get it, and I hate it, and all of the above. And
I think the
it's a
Lego
mess.
videos were just banned by YouTube, right? I think
Oh, is that right? Thank God. I did not consent to see these. Do not send them to me. Stop sending me Lego videos. I'm done with it.
Yeah, it's intense propaganda, intense.
Yeah, and they're
Yeah.
really good at it. It's like they have been, dialing it in for a very long time. And, I say they've been doomsday prepping for this war for 47 years. Like, Hegseth just got in there. He's just, it's like they're really not approaching this correctly. Anyways, I want to thank you for your time. Please come back. I will not be as much of a mess next time you're on the show. Hopefully, next time we're on, it'll be when Iran is hopefully free. There's so much happening and so much changing all the time. And Gissou Nia, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Welcome back to the Foreign Report. I'm Seena Gazavi, Travis Irvine. Thank you, Gissou Nia, for an amazing interview. That was amazing. Hopefully, I think the big takeaway there, right? Just stay active, counter the propaganda that's out there, understand that Iranian voices do want something, and hold the complexity in yourself. That's another big thing there. But let's keep it moving to everyone's favorite segment.
Give him a chance, it's JD Vance. No, wait, he sucks.
Club remix, ladies and gentlemen. Club remix indeed. All right, Seena. Well, we've had some hope today. We've had some bad news, some weird news, but Gissou gave us some hope, and I do want to offer everyone else a little bit more hope on today's JD Vance Corner, because sometimes JD Vance Corner, it ends pretty dark as well. But today, I got great news for everyone. Last week, we played a hilarious clip of JD Vance being sent to Hungary to campaign for Viktor Orban, and he tried to call Trump, and then the phone didn't work, and then I think on the second call it worked, and we pontificated that this was another way for JD Vance to be sent out into the international stage, the world stage, in a way to get him away from the Iran war that he hates, and let him kind of fail. Well, I sent you an article immediately after that happened, and that is on Polymarket. Viktor Orban's chances of winning plummeted after JD Vance went to go visit and campaign for him. And as of Sunday, ladies and gentlemen, for anyone who knows anyone in Hungary, they were hungry for change. Viktor Orban lost his re-election, and you couldn't paint a better picture of where JD Vance stands right now, not just in MAGA world, but now the entire world, as such a dismal failure. Seena.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's funny. You've been saying on the JD Vance Corner, JD goes to the Pope, he dies. JD goes to, what was the even thing, something around then? It was like, that he did the Iran negotiations. They fell through immediately.
Yes.
Now he did Viktor Orban. And everyone else is doing your bit now. Everyone else
Yes.
is now catching up to Travis Irvine's JD Vance bit, which is so funny. Everyone's doing it. And it's like, everyone is caught up on the thing that we've been talking about for a year.
Yes, they're catching up to where we have been. Give him a chance. He's JD Vance. No way,
he sucks.
That is why we made that officially the jingle. And I just want to share a quote from one of our listeners, Zach Luck, who also conveniently has known me since middle school, but he sent this my way.
So your friend Zach. Friend Zach.
Shout out to Zach. And also listens to the show. He's a listener first and a friend second. That's how I treat my friends.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you don't listen to my show, are you even my friend?
Yeah, are we
Zach
friends?
Luck. Zach Luck is my friend. This is great, though. He sent me this a bit from an article that even as Mr. Vance's allies make little secret of his private opposition to the conflict in Iran, he has publicly stood by the president and as the leader of the delegation. This was obviously before this whole delegation attempt failed at reaching a negotiation. JD will find it challenging to separate himself from the war and several other Trump missteps moving forward, regardless of the outcome. And this is what Trump had to say about it. This is great. I got to get my my Trump voice ready. If it doesn't happen, I'm blaming JD Vance. Mr. Trump said to laughter of Mr. Vance trying to secure a deal at an Easter lunch earlier this month. And if it does happen, I'm taking full credit. Ladies and gentlemen, Trump in a nutshell, and JD Vance, as Marcus Parks said, 2 words: fall guy. This guy is falling hard right now, and now his stock is fallen worldwide.
And as the stock market plummets, as the economy craters because of Trump's war of choice and his like awful policies, his tariffs are not working out, all of these things, JD's going to be the guy that gets cooked. It's the same thing that happened with Kamala.
Yes.
Biden's inflation fiasco, his post-COVID problems, ruined it for Kamala.
Yes, and that's actually a very good point. I mean, I'm a bit of a president and history nerd, but this is why it's so hard for vice presidents to then run to continue the term after their president is term limited. I mean, Al Gore got cooked, and Al Gore got cooked when Bill Clinton actually had a good economy and everything. It was just the sex scandals that Al Gore felt he had to, I have to kiss my wife super hard at the nomination ceremonies. And then he went down for that. So this is why historically it's very hard for vice presidents to actually become president unless the president dies. And then you're a sure thing. But can you even get a second term out of that? Even that has proven difficult for some presidents and vice presidents in U.S. history.
I can't wait for the JD Vance tell-all book when he's just going to be like, I gave him everything. I gave him the best years of my life. And this is how he treated me.
I'm telling you.
Do you think he'll come out
you
against
and I,
Trump?
we've been talking. I think we are due for a book on who JD really is. And honestly, the history of who he really is, right? And how he's become where he's become. We've highlighted that on this show. Again, go back, listen to all our episodes from the last year. I mean, this guy is a Peter Thiel recipe. Peter Thiel's in the kitchen cooking, and whatever he's cooking sucks, and it's JD Vance. So let's see what happens. Let's see how long this JD Vance experiment works.
I can't wait for the next thing. I think whoever's going to be in the NBA championships, we should just send them to the other team. You know what I mean? Send JD Vance anywhere you want someone to lose. Okay,
yeah.
Just send
that's
them
a
there.
great idea, right? Send him to Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial, and let's see what happens.
Exactly. All right, guys. Well, that's the show for today. Sign up for the Foreign Report Show, the newsletter on foreignreportshow.com. All of his socials and stuff. We'll be back next week with another episode, of course. Travis, we got this. JD Vance is still going to keep playing the hits for us. I can't believe, when we started, I just can't believe it. It's just a little bit that you thought was just going to be like a little thing. It's really just beautiful. It's beautiful. It keeps on giving, man.